Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. We have another really important week of Penn State football progress ahead of us here in Happy Valley as the Nittany Lions work their way toward an August 30th season kickoff against Nevada and Beaver Stadium. We will be live on the practice field again later on Tuesday. We're recording on Tuesday afternoon here in State College. So stay tuned for our practice notebooks, photo gallery from the practice field, video highlights from the practice field, and all the commentary you come to expect from our post-practice interviews with the coaching staff, notably James Franklin, and a variety of players, all over at Lions247.com for our VIP subscribers. 50% gets you VIP access at Lions247.com right now. 50% off, I should say, gets you in the door at Lions247 for a limited time. We're going to pick up this episode on recruiting, actually. It's a topic we haven't addressed in recent weeks with the preseason camp taking center stage. We're also going to talk about the primary obstacle in Penn State's path toward the Big Ten championship during the James Franklin era, and that has been the Ohio State Buckeyes. We're going to go out to Columbus, talk with an Ohio State beat reporter, and learn a lot more about how the defending national champions are developing in their August camp leading up to a kickoff against top-ranked Texas. And if you missed it, the AP Top 25 poll dropped earlier this week, and it revealed that Penn State is number 2 behind the Texas Longhorns and ahead of the Ohio State Buckeyes, marking the first time this century that Penn State will enter a season as the top-ranked Big Ten team in the AP Top 25 poll. I'm curious to get some feedback on that result from Columbus as well. But as promised, we begin this episode with perspective on recruiting. That means our recruiting insider, Tyler Calvaruso, is back on the Lions247 Podcast. Tyler, good to get you back on board with us. Sorry we haven't had you on as often as late, but there's been a lot happening on the practice field we've had to get to. And so good to get you back on board right now.
Yeah, good to be back. Good to talk recruiting. Listen, man, I know this time of year I take a back seat. I'm like partially retired from the podcast this time of year, but I'm back now, and I'm going to be back more often because home games coming around the corner. You know that means visits, so I got plenty to talk about pretty soon.
Yeah, pretty soon we'll have you on for those weekly installments of who's visiting Beaver Stadium this weekend and what does it mean. But first things first, we've got a few topics to navigate here ahead of the 2025 season. I asked you to come up with 5 key storylines for Penn State recruiting as things stand right now, approaching mid-August. And the first thing we're going to get to is the quarterback position, because while Penn State has things pretty squared away in the 2026 class, Troy Hune committed for a while, top 24/7 prospect out of Southern California. Peyton Fzone came on board, then left, now an Auburn commit. But that 2027 cycle, some things brewing this week. Bring us up to speed. Tell us what it means and why you think it's a key, notable angle for Penn State recruiting right now.
Yeah, quarterback recruiting, no matter how you slice it, it's always one of the most important conversations we can have when it comes to the recruiting trail. And one of Penn State's top targets went off the board earlier this week, Peter Bourke, top 100 quarterback out of Massachusetts, really, really talented kid. He's going to Michigan, pledged to the Wolverines on Monday, and that's a blow for Penn State, no doubt about it. I mean, there was a point where crystal ball picks were in favor of the Nittany Lions, and looked for a long time like Penn State was in the driver's seat there. I think the tide here really started to turn around June when Bourke made it out to Ann Arbor, got back around the Michigan staff. Really, really good visit, and now he's off the board to the Wolverines here in early August. We're still early August. We're almost at that midway point, but still early August. And where does Penn State go now? That's the question that pops up anytime you see a top quarterback target go off the board. Really, you got a spot like Keegan Croucher, top 24/7 passer, New York native. He's prepping at Cheshire Academy in Connecticut, alma mater of Luke Reynolds. So I know that's a spot Penn State fans are plenty familiar with. He's going to be on campus for a visit during the fall. Penn State waited a little while to offer Keegan Croucher. That didn't come until he visited in June, but he's on the board with an offer. Danny O'Brien really, really likes him. Saw Croucher throw on a couple different occasions before James Franklin pulled the trigger on an offer. It's not going to be an easy one for Penn State. Oregon's right in the mix. Ole Miss is right in the mix. A bunch of other programs pushing really hard here. And Croucher's also a legitimate pitching prospect. It seems like he's going to play quarterback the next level. It seems like that's where it's hard set on. And that's just – I think it's an added layer to this recruitment to keep an eye on because, you know, you never know where things are going to go when you got baseball in the mix. But regardless, Keegan Croucher, really talented QB, and I think he's at the center of Penn State's quarterback board right now. But what happens if Croucher goes elsewhere, right? It's limited. beyond him. There haven't been many offers put out at quarterback in 27. Bourke was the focus for really a long time. Now that he's gone elsewhere, it's not back to the drawing board because a guy like Croucher is still available for the taking. Penn State also doesn't feel like it has to rush here. It feels like it could go through that fall evaluation process, carry things out into the winter because they've got a guy on board in 26 in Troy Yoon, like you mentioned. They really like him, and they think he's going to be a big part of the future. So it seems like the Penn State staff is going to be content. They're going to let some film roll in. They're going to do some evaluating. I'm sure there are plenty of guys in the Northeast that are going to be worth charting, and beyond the Northeast as well. Peyton Houston is the only other uncommitted QB offer Penn State has out right now. He's a top 24/7 passer from Louisiana. That one's probably going to be even tougher than Croucher. I think he's going to land elsewhere. So for me, from my perspective and asking around, right now, I'd put the QB recruiting conversation, like I said, an important one. It surrounds Keegan Croucher, and it surrounds what comes on the fall evaluation front.
I'm looking back to like the start of camp season, late May, early June, and I recall there was buzz around Bourke and Penn State, maybe a crystal ball pick even popping up, that maybe Penn State was going to be positioned in the driver's seat, with a caveat that he had a lot of exploration to do in his recruitment. What do you gather now that we're in August and his decision has been made? What had the winds blowing toward a different Big Ten campus at Michigan at the end of the day?
Really, I think talking to Chip Lindsey, Michigan's offensive coordinator, during that June visit that I mentioned, I think that gave Bourke probably the best feel for how he would fit in Michigan's offense that he's had at any point in his recruitment. I think once he heard that pitch and found out really the intricacies of the offense and how his arm talent could play in it, I think that helped put Michigan over the top, because it was a close race between Penn State and Michigan. It's not like Michigan blew Penn State out of the water here. It was a battle between the Nittany Lions and the Wolverines. I remember Georgia was pretty involved at one point as well. And it's a tough blow. I come back to that just because, Bourke visited Penn State more than any other program. His relationships with Danny O'Brien, with James Franklin, with Trace McSorley, they seem to be in a really, really good place. And, obviously NIL is a part of that very quarterback recruiting conversation, especially for a prospect of Bourke's ilk. Top 100 kid. He's got an advanced skill set, really powerful arm. I think he's a little bit older for the 27 class, but I still think there's a lot for a college coaching staff to tap into. It's a tough deal for Penn State. Bourke was definitely most wanted on that quarterback board, but I think it was that conversation with Chip Lindsey and the Michigan staff that really took things to the next level and helped Michigan get this one done over the Nittany Lions.
Last thing on this subject, any carryover effect from Peyton Fzone departing the 2026 class, or was that more of a unique circumstance where you had a clear plus athlete in the state of Pennsylvania playing quarterback, you were willing to give that a shot? Does that kind of just in a vacuum on its own, or is there any carryover that could impact the way Penn State pursues its quarterback class here in 27?
I don't think so. I think that was just a unique kind of deal. We have covered Falzone's athletic exploits and where he needs to grow as a true quarterback ad nauseum at this point. So every Penn State fans who listen to us, they know, Peyton Fzone has every athletic trait and all of the athletic ability you could possibly ask for out of a high school prospect. But there's still a lot to do as a quarterback. And Penn State was willing to take a chance on that. They were willing to develop it. But at the end of the day, it went in a different direction. He's committed to suit up and play at Auburn at the next level now, as our Nittany Lions listeners know. But, yeah, it was a unique thing. I don't think it's going to have any impact on the way things play out in 27. That was just one of those recruitments where you love the athleticism. Kids with those kind of traits, they don't come around every day. You want to have as many high-level athletes in your program as possible, especially when one's right in your backyard like Fzone. So, yeah, man, I would say that's a unique kind of thing.
Yeah, I figured that wouldn't put the pressure on Penn State to get two quarterbacks in the next cycle. What I do wonder through all this, with the 26 class, with Yoon coming on board, how he looks, the 27 cycle, how it works out, are we entering a stage now where Penn State's going to seriously consider picking up a transfer quarterback?
I think that's more where.
Right.
Yeah.
And they've never done that. They've never done that in the portal era, and everyone else has. And a bunch of their primary competitors for college playoff spots every year seemingly have a transfer quarterback behind center for them. But just something to keep tabs on is Ethan Grunkemeyer and Jackson Smollett currently battling for the backup job. Redshirt sophomore, redshirt freshman. You got a true freshman in Beckham Kritza. A lot to figure out in the post-Aller era. And this is a Penn State team that hasn't turned things over at quarterback much under James Franklin. You got 3 years out of Aller, 4 years at starting quarterback for Sean Clifford with that COVID year. And before that, 3 years of starting work for Trace McSorley. So long runs at starting quarterback spot, a lot to figure out beyond 2025. We'll figure out how that 27 class can factor in long-term. Elsewhere in that 27 cycle, Calvaruso, the number one running back in America, has been committed to Penn State for quite some time. Kamon Spell is a young man that we got a long look at Nittany Lions camp this summer, working with new position coach Stan Drayton. He said a lot of great things about that experience. He loves a lot about the Nittany Lions, and yet he will continue to take a look at other options across the college football landscape. Penn State, in-state running back with Kamon Spell, but when he is the number one player at his position and a projected 5-star talent come his senior year, it's going to be a battle down to the wire. And take us through that, because you've got that on your list of storylines as well.
Yeah, anytime you get a prospect like Spell committed, his talent, I mean, for my money, he's probably the best running back prospect I've seen in my time doing this. And he's got everything you could possibly want. So anytime you reel a guy like that in, no matter what he says, no matter how many times he reaffirms his commitment, these other schools are going to keep calling. And they have not stopped calling Kamon Spell, and he hasn't been pressing decline. He's been listening to what some of these other programs have had to say. Because, look, it's kind of like Messiah Mickens, committed really, really early. Committed before the beginning of his sophomore season. That takes away an element of the recruitment. You don't take as many visits as some of your classmates. You don't take as many visits as some of the elite level prospects that you're friends with from the 7-on-7 circuit. You just don't have those same experiences. But Kamon Spell, while committed to Penn State, he's going to get out and take some fall visits. And I have it as one of my 5 storylines, because really I want to see where things sit with Spell at the end of it all. One, do all of these visits take place as originally anticipated? Because look, I mentioned Mickens earlier. There was a point in time, this past spring, it looked like he was going to get out and take some visits. He ultimately decided against it, so there's always a chance Spell goes in a different direction. I don't anticipate that he will. I think he's going to get out and see some of these other schools. The second part of it for me is what happens when he actually gets to these college campuses and has the conversations with these coaches, because it's just not something that he has done. So he's going to get some fresh perspectives on fit and scheme. He's going to get some fresh perspectives on just relationship building in other places. And obviously, I mentioned it with Peter Bourke, and it rings even truer with Kamon Spell. He's a 5-star recruit. There's an NIL aspect of all of this. He's going to have conversations that he has not had with other programs. So I think, I get asked on the board quite often, should we be concerned about where things stand with Kamon Spell right now? And I've always said in the past, anytime a kid gets out who's committed and he takes visits elsewhere, yeah, there's a reason for a level of concern. But in this day and age of college football, I think this is it is what it is, right? It's tough to keep a kid from taking visits, especially when you're talking about the importance of dollars and cents. Is that to say that's all Kamon Spell's recruitment is about? No, not even close. Not even close. Kamon Spell, he loves the Penn State staff. He really, really likes Stan Drayton. I just think he has this real, genuine desire to see what else is out there for him, see what kind of relationships he can build elsewhere, and again, see what other NIL conversations are had elsewhere. We'd be burying our head in the sand if we ignored that part of it. But if there's a school that could really push Penn State down the stretch here, I've said it from the start, even when Spell reaffirmed things in the spring, it's got to be Notre Dame. Notre Dame has to be the one that I have circled, because Kamon Spell's relationship when he committed to Penn State, yes, it was with Terry Smith, who spearheaded this thing from the start. Yes, it was with assistant running backs coach Charles Walker. And yes, Stan Drayton has done a really, really good job picking things up where Jaywan Sider left off. But who's in South Bend, we're heading up that running backs room now, Jaywan Sider. And that's a really good relationship. So Notre Dame's not going to go away. That's the one I have circled if there is a school that's really going to make a move on Penn State in the end. But internally, there's still optimism that Nittany Lions are going to get this one across the line, because they're going to do whatever it takes to sign Kamon Spell. We talk about keeping the best in Pennsylvania, that being the mantra for James Franklin and the staff. I mean, Kamon Spell is the guy in Pennsylvania in 27.
Excellent segue, Tyler Calvaruso, and we want to jump into that conversation right now, because we are learning more about who is being prioritized by Penn State in the 2027 recruiting cycle. Did quite well for themselves in the 2026 recruiting cycle to this point. Missed on some key targets this summer that we addressed quite a bit here on the podcast earlier. But the aim has to be high for 27 in-state, because it certainly seems like, and this is probably my 10th or so cycle covering for Penn State, and this is up there with just about any of them in terms of guys who are only halfway through their high school career, but we're projecting towards blue chip status. We're projecting toward potential top 24/7 status. There is more of that volume within a 2.5 hour vicinity for the Nittany Lions in this cycle than there normally is readily available.
Yeah, Penn State has issued just shy of 20 offers, in-state offers, to uncommitted recruits. And sometimes you see that number, and Penn State puts out some early offers, and things don't really go anywhere because the kid doesn't develop or the board plays out in a different manner. It happens. That's part of recruiting, no matter where you're from. But you look at the list of in-state prospects Penn State has offered in the 27 cycle, and a large majority of them are top prospects. And it's early in the cycle, but they are already standing out as clear top targets for this staff. I mean, recently I wrote an article about 10 offensive recruits who could potentially make this Penn State 2027 class special. And a large majority of them were Pennsylvania kids. And the same apply from the defensive side of the ball as well. So there is a lot of talent in the backyard for James Franklin and his staff in this cycle. And they've already hit. We just spent a few minutes talking about Come On Spell. I mean, Khalil Taylor out of Pine Richland, top 100 wideout. He's on board. Guys like Max Hiller, who's a blue chip offensive lineman. Penn State high on the list. He plays at Coatesville, teammates with Terry Wiggins, who's on board in the 26 class. Matthew Gregory, composite 5-star wideout from Owen J. Roberts high down in Pottstown. I mean, he's got Penn State high on the list. And he's told me several times, hey, look, Penn State's a place it's got everything I need and it's close to home. So they're going to be in it until the end. It's prospects like that. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. I haven't even talked about Jimmy Kalis from Central Catholic, who's a top 24/7 offensive tackle. Terrence Smith, top 24/7 offensive lineman from Lansdale Catholic. Pennsylvania is flat out loaded. That's just the offensive side. Brandon Lockley from St. Joe's Prep. He's a top linebacker target. Zyke Scott, Zayden Smith. They're high on the linebacker board for Dan Carter, and they're right in the backyard. So, yeah, I'm kind of siding with your take. I've seen talented Pennsylvania classes, but this 27 group, when it comes to the number of viable high-level targets, top guys on the board, this is one of the deeper cycles I've had the pleasure of covering.
Yeah, I have to go back and comb through it. Obviously, there was a lot of love for that 2018 class headlined by Micah Parsons. That was the first recruiting class I covered, dealing as a Penn State reporter. But this is up there with any of them. I think that's certainly, and they have a while to make their case. They're going to be juniors in high school this year, so we got a lot to learn about them. There'll be new names that pop up. But James Franklin says it as often as he possibly can in front of a microphone. The best in PA stay in PA, and that'll be the goal again for 27. Tyler, we focused a bunch on what's happening next cycle, but here in the 2026 cycle, which has about 4 months left until the early signing period, and then in about 5 months from now, a bunch of these recruits will be here on campus as Nittany Lions freshmen, potentially participating in playoff practices. But as currently constructed, 26 guys on 24, 26, 25-ish guys on board for the 2025 class or 2026 class, Tyler. But this is entering flip season territory. Last year, we saw Cam Smith come on over from Duke's class. We saw Matthew Allen jump up from Virginia Tech's class. When we talk about that potential for Penn State in the next few months, where does your focus land?
So 24 guys on board, so you had it right. You nailed it on that one. It's tough because last year you mentioned those guys. They were clear, like when you looked at the flip conversation, hey, those are guys Penn State could go out and get and, turn them off their original commitment and bring them to State College. This year, it's a little bit more murky because, a lot of the top guys that Penn State went after in June and missed on in June, the fact of the matter is they got, pretty solid, well off elsewhere financially. As Penn State can be able to compete with that down the stretch run. I think NIL in general with the rev sharing and all that now too, I think it's going to be interesting to see. This is the real first year where flip season might look a little bit different because of the contracts and the rev share and everything that goes along with that. But there are still guys that Penn State, they're charting, guys that can make a move on late. They've issued a few new offers on the interior of the defensive line, guys who are committed elsewhere. And I'll tell you, they're listening to Deion Barnes and this Penn State staff. I told you Keemon Spell's not pressing decline on his phone when the calls come in. These guys aren't pressing decline when Coach Barnes hops on the phone and gives them a ring. So I think Penn State's working really, really hard to round out this 26 cycle the best it can, probably more so on the defensive side of the ball than anything else, specifically in the trenches on the D-line. But right now, I think once September rolls around and once these fall visits really get going in full swing, we'll see if any of them pop up at the whiteout because that's obviously going to be a hot ticket. We'll get into that in a little bit. But I think they're going to be working the flip front really hard. We're keeping one eye on that, one eye on getting a head start in this 27 group that's already so strong because flip season might look a little bit different this year.
I note that you're a little hesitant to say any specific names. I'm not going to put you any pressure on for you to put a kid's name out there in a relatively sensitive topic like this, where he's already engaged in another commitment with a different coaching staff. But you brought up Deion Barnes. Give me the 3 positions you think are most likely to be addressed by Penn State going and grabbing somebody from a different class. You don't have to say who their names are. I'm assuming one is the defensive line. Would you go tackle or end? And what other positions would you look at?
It would be it'd probably be DT. They're looking to add 1, maybe even 2 there if it's right. Yeah, I have no problem giving names there. Really, it's Didiju Ba. I was kind of hesitant to say that one just because I didn't want to butcher it. He's committed to Wisconsin. I think I got it though. I don't know. I'll hit him up and see. I'll send him the clip later. But he's been committed to Wisconsin for a little over a month and a half now. But he's open to visiting Penn State in the fall. Talented kid who's still new to football. And I say that because I always talk about how these coaches like a kid who's moldable. Ba's definitely that. Keatron Harris, he's committed to Arizona, but his stock has been on the rise. I mean, he's been reeling in some new offers, Penn State being one of them, and Penn State's trying to push for a flip there. So D-tackle is one I've got my eye on. Linebacker, they seem set. On the edge, they were keeping an eye on Whitey Collier, but that's out the window because he reclassed, signed with Rutgers. I think Ashari Charles, top 24/7 edge rusher he's committed to Miami now. Before that, it was sounding like he was going to get to Penn State for an official visit for the whiteout. The door's not shut there. Sounds like it could still happen. We'll see if it comes to fruition, but the door is not shut. I know Miami's trying to keep him from taking other visits, but he's going to be out at Florida State for a visit, and he's still talking to the Penn State staff. And then at corner, Terry Smith's always working. We know that. That's one of those things that kind of goes without saying on a cycle in, cycle out basis. But I think there's going to be a move at corner, maybe even safety as well. I think Anthony Poindexter has some lines out, but that's not a huge priority when it comes to numbers. But so I'm looking more so at corner and maybe, trying to generate something with Dorian Barney, 4-star Penn State was in really well with, but Michigan won out in the end. I don't think Penn State's quitting there. And they're going to continue to recruit all the top guys, like I mentioned, Corey Adams, Joey O'Brien, Travis Johnson. But it's going to be really, really tough to get them off their original commitments.
I appreciate the perspective. I want to finish with something you've referenced a few times in your answers here, and that's that the whiteout projects as a massive recruiting event. Again, we don't have to wait too long into the season. It's going to be that last Saturday of September when Oregon comes across the country and plays in Beaver Stadium against Penn State, 2 teams inside the top 10 entering the year and 2 teams that met for the Big Ten championship game last December in Indianapolis. It's going to be a major stage set. I'd imagine it's going to be one that Penn State would love to get as many interested prospects and flip targets into the bleachers for. So you're already getting some confirmations. You put this on our list to talk about here in August. So why is this already such a relevant topic of conversation in the Penn State recruiting department?
Got to talk about the whiteout, man. Every year it's the biggest deal when it comes to recruiting in season. But this might be the biggest whiteout from a recruiting perspective that I've gotten the chance to cover here during my time on the beat here at Penn State. It's just the quality of opponent, the magnitude of the game. Every kid, it feels like you kind of forget that Penn State has 3 home games before Oregon rolls into town, just because I feel like every time I'm talking to a kid, hey, when are you going to make him back out to Penn State? It's the whiteout. Everyone's locking in for the whiteout. That's the hottest ticket. That's when these kids want to be back at Beaver Stadium. And there are going to be some that aren't able to make it. Like Mekhi Brown, he's a top 24/7 edge rusher out of Connecticut, really high on the board for Deion Barnes. He's visiting for the season opener because the whiteout doesn't really line up for him. Colt Lumpers, he's a top 24/7 tight end. He wants to visit for the whiteout, but he's got a game on Saturday at 3:30. So unless he wants to roll into town around the fourth quarter, that's probably not going to work for him. And we talked about Keegan Croucher earlier. He plays Saturday. He might not be able to make it for the whiteout. So there are going to be a bunch of kids. It's going to be a very high quality fall for Penn State. But this mirrors last year Ohio State matchup where there were 100+ prospects in attendance and a lot of high quality kids. You're going to see the same, I think, times 10 for this year's whiteout. Because again, if you go on Lions247 and you look at some of the early confirmations that we have for the whiteout, it's kind of a who's who of that Penn State 2027 board. Top targets all over the place. And we're in early August. That list is going to grow exponentially within the next month and a half. So this one, I'd be remiss not to talk about this one, man. It's going to be huge.
Yeah, it always is a big one, and we'll be looking forward to this for a while. No offense to those non-conference opponents, but they're not exactly the flashiest matchups available. Then you've got a bye week, and then you got this big one in Beaver Stadium that Penn State's going to have to show up ready for, and recruits will be on hand to take a close look at the program and hopefully get some time with the coaching staff before and after the matchup as well. Tyler, really appreciate when you hop on and give us the latest on recruiting, kind of a forward-looking segment here with what's going on for the Nittany Lions. On day-to-day basis, you've got our VIP subscribers covered at Lions247.com. You can become one of them if you are not for 50% off right now, and you will never miss the latest on Penn State recruiting thanks to Tyler Calvaruso, national recruiting analysts like Brian Doan and our 247 Sports Network. Tyler, appreciate you, man. We'll talk to you real soon.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you having me back on.
As promised, this episode of the Lions247 Podcast continues with focus on Columbus. That's where we'll find the defending champion Ohio State Buckeyes working toward their 2025 season. They kick off on the same day as Penn State, but a little bit different than what the Nittany Lions encounter in Beaver Stadium with Nevada as a 45-point favorite. Ohio State going to take on the number 1 ranked team in the Associated Press Top 25 preseason poll, the Texas Longhorns. So anticipation building, some questions about this team as they have a lot to replace from a coaching staff and roster perspective after their run to a title last year. And who better to break it all down for us halfway through preseason camp than Patrick Murphy, who covers the Ohio State Buckeyes for bucknuts.com within our 247 Sports Network. Patrick, good to get you back. I think we had you just after spring camps closed in late April, early May. So a lot to catch up on with the Buckeyes, as both of us are just a couple weeks away from seeing our respective teams play in game action. As I said, a little bit different of a matchup you're gearing up for, though.
Yeah, it's crazy how quickly the time flies on all this. And it feels like just a couple days ago we were doing this for the post-spring episode. But yeah, like you said, week 1, Ohio State, Texas. It's a noon kickoff, which is driving everyone locally up a wall, as I'm sure you could attest to last year with Ohio State coming to Beaver Stadium for a noon kick. But people are excited. I think it's interesting. I was talking about this on a radio show I did the other day of like, you need good week 1 matchups, but do you want it to be your team, whether it's the team you're a fan of, the team you're covering? Because I do think if you have it week 2, week 3, you have a little bit more idea of what it's going to look like. This is going to be interesting. 2 teams obviously expected to be very good in Ohio State and Texas, but a lot of questions on both sides of the ball that we're still trying to get answered and may not know until that game's over.
Of course, Ohio State finished last season at the mountaintop, but a fresh start for everybody here in 2025. They are number 3 in those preseason rankings that we talked about, trailing Penn State at number 2, Texas at number 1, Ohio State with 1,472 total points, Penn State with 1,547, and Texas with 1,552. When you look at the first place votes here, Texas got 25 of them, Penn State got 23 of them, and then next up in a significant gap, Ohio State with 11 first place votes. First time this century that Penn State's going to go into a season as the top ranked team in the Big Ten. Typically, that's been a label that the Buckeyes have carried. What do you make of Penn State overall, the consensus here in the AP voting being just an edge ahead of Ohio State in terms of national perspective? I believe the coaches poll had these things flipped, but what do you make of that? Because it's for a while been Ohio State's up here. Michigan might be right there with them, but Penn State has been just a little bit below. It seems like the consensus has kind of that evolving in a significant way here in 2025.
I'm not surprised. I think that's what a lot of people expected of the coaches poll. You look at the unofficial Big Ten rankings that Cleveland.com does, and really all of the ones I've seen, at least, I think Penn State was the favorite to win the Big Ten. And so I think with everything they've got coming back, it's similar to what Ohio State was a year ago, Michigan 2 years ago. The expectations are high, and I can't fault that. There's a lot of talent that's going to be playing in Beaver Stadium this fall. I do think Ohio State, not to say that one is necessarily better, but I think that Ohio State is coming in, despite being the defending national champion, with not so much of the buzz that we had a year ago or even in those other years you mentioned where they have been the favorite in the Big Ten. And I think that largely has to do with how much left last offseason. You look at defending national champions, a lot of times they bring back more than this, right? And even last year with Michigan, I think it was a similar level of like well, the Wolverines should be good, but they lost this guy, right? So not surprised. Like I said, I think Ryan Day and his team probably actually prefer it this way to a year ago at this time when it was natty or bust. What happens if they don't win a national championship? All that stuff. You like to have the talent returning and the experience and all that, than maybe the uncertainty at some different positions that you have on this team. But I do think not to say the pressure's off because it's Ohio State, pressure is always on, but you can kind of go into that even huge game week 1 without everyone talking about you all of preseason. Obviously, once we get to that week, that will be one of the focal points of the discussion leading into that first Saturday. But I do think it's just a different feel and understandable given how many guys left were drafted in the NFL or were unsigned free agents for teams at the next level.
Give us a bit of a preseason progress report on where things are trending on offense and defense with those new coordinators. Obviously, Jim Knowles now coaching the defense here for Penn State, a longtime NFL coach, Matt Patricia, now leading the Buckeyes defense, and then Chip Kelly, who was the offensive play caller 1 year with Ohio State last year, back in the NFL, working with Pete Carroll for the Las Vegas Raiders. He was replaced internally, promotion for Brian Hartline, longtime receivers coach. And so any side, you have a sense that one side's moving along quicker than the other. And like I said, with Texas as the opener, there's really nowhere to hide for either side of the ball.
I think there's a lot of excitement on both sides. When we got to watch the first 3 days of fall camp practice, now it was early, only one of those days was in pads, but you saw a lot of wins on either side. And it's funny when you watch practice, and you know this, Tyler, like if one side of the ball does something, it's like, well, if the defensive line has a win, gets a sack, we say sack, even though the quarterbacks aren't getting hit, then what the questions become about the offensive line, right? So hard to judge, but I would say it was pretty balanced from what we saw. I think that the Buckeyes recognize like there is a lack of experience in a big way on both sides. You look at the offensive side of the ball, the guys coming back, Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. You do have a decent amount of the offensive linemen back that played some last year at the very least. They did have to rotate. Obviously, that was a story coming to the Penn State game last year with the injury to Josh Simmons. Seth McLaughlin got hurt. So some more guys got playing time than maybe they expected. So the offensive line, but really other than that, quarterback, running back, your slot receiver, your tight end, all of that are new, but they like the talent. Similarly, on the defensive side of the ball, whole new defensive line. All 4 guys that started last year are gone. The linebacker, Sonny Styles, is back, but you have to replace Cody Simon, who was the national championship MVP. You lose Denzel Bourke, but you've got Davis Igbinosun back. And really the cherry on top is you do have another year with Caleb Downs. So I think both sides are kind of similar in that you have some guys at some important positions coming back that you can kind of lean on as sort of your anchors on that side of the ball. And then you've got these inexperienced guys. And one of the things we keep hearing about this team is they're really hungry despite having won a national championship a year ago, because a lot of these guys were either smaller contributors or didn't really play much at all. And so there's this motivation to not necessarily outdo what last year's team did, but live up to that and kind of prove yourself that you can play at that level. And I think it's made things really competitive. Tough to say if one side is ahead of the other at that point. I think it's kind of gone back and forth from what we saw and what we've heard. But I think Buckeye fans should probably feel solidly about where things are and obviously hope to see the progress as the season goes on.
You mentioned there's competitions across the field. Clearly, when the quarterback job is open, that's going to be spotlighted. And what's the latest on that situation in Columbus?
Yeah, that's the $1 million question around here, as you might expect. It's been very balanced, very competitive. I wrote in a notebook I did coming out of the first full week of fall camp on Sunday that, I get asked about the quarterback stuff all the time by Buckeye fans when I'm talking to friends or family or whatnot. And people never like my answer because it's like, this is a real competition. I don't think one guy has taken a big lead or anything like that, which was the same thing I was saying in spring. And I think if you talk to other reporters on the beat, you get the same answer. When you talk to the coaches, they give you the same answer. So I will say it does sound like Julian Sayin, the former Alabama, well, he was at Alabama for like 2 weeks, former 5-star prospect, the guy who's been the favorite, at least in fans' minds, going into this whole competition. has started to put together more consistent performances. And that's been the big thing with him is the ceiling is as high as you can get with Julian Sayin. That's why he was, I think, our number 3 quarterback coming out of high school, and why Nick Saban wanted him to be, one of his quarterbacks. But it's been putting it together day after day after day. I think Lincoln Kienholz, who is going into his 3rd year in the program, has been a bit more consistent, but maybe you don't see the high ceiling with the arm talent. He's athletic. He certainly has enough arm talent to be successful, but Julian Sayin can do some special things when he's on. And I think he started to be on more probably in the last week or so. Ohio State had their first scrimmage of fall camp last Saturday. It sounds like Julian Sayin had probably the best throws from people we talked to coming out of that. Maybe Lincoln Kienholz continued to just kind of be steady. So I think if I were to guess, if Julian Sayin continues to put together these type of performances throughout this week, they'll have another scrimmage on Saturday. I could see Ryan Day naming Julian the starter that following Monday when we meet with him. Now, it could go that, if it doesn't stay as consistent, maybe they push that. Ryan Day said it could go down to the wire leading into that first game against Texas. But I think they would like to, if the players earn it, and that's been the big thing. Ryan Day's always made his guys earn it. I think they would like to have a guy at least a week out, so you have time for that guy to settle in as a starter. My money would remain on Julian Sayin, but I would not be surprised, nor do I think it would be a bad thing if Lincoln Kienholz wins the job. I think with all these weapons that Ohio State has, either guy can be successful.
If my math is right, this will be the 4th consecutive Penn State-Ohio State matchup that features a new starting quarterback for the Buckeyes at quarterback. 3rd straight, that'll be Drew Aller. Before that, you had 4 straight with Sean Clifford. We've seen a little bit of a rotation here with Ohio State, whether it's some homegrown talent, some transfer pickups along the way, and some new names to consider here moving toward 2025 kickoff. When you look at this complete offensive collection, and I'm going to take 2 guys off the table for your answer because I think we have a pretty good idea. Taking Carnell Tate at wide receiver and, of course, Jeremiah Smith at wide receiver away from your answers, who do you think is the biggest playmaker that Ohio State's going to present their opponents with this year? I'm acknowledging they lost 2 second-round picks at running back from last year's team.
Yeah, I think we'll start at running back since you brought that up. James Peoples, who is entering his 2nd season, played, I think he had like 49 touches last year as a true freshman. He's a guy they were excited about going back to last year. Obviously, when you have TreVeyon Henderson come back and you add Quinshon Judkins in the transfer portal, that limits how much a freshman is going to get the ball. But in their first game against Akron, I think it was early in the 3rd quarter, they put James Peoples in with the starters in the red zone, and he scores his first career touchdown, his first career carry. I don't think they do that unless they like what James Peoples was showing. The game was starting to get out of hand at that point, but still, like I said, the starters were in, and along with James Peoples. So he's a guy. They brought in CJ Donaldson from West Virginia, a guy who's lost weight. And he's a guy that I think they expect to use more in the passing game coming out of the backfield than they have before, or that he has been done at West Virginia. He's a guy who has a receiving background coming out of high school. So a big guy, he can kind of be their power back, but running backs coach Carlos Laughlin also likes him catching passes. And then another guy I'll mention, you took out the 2 main receivers, but Brandon Inniss is a guy who had Emeka Egbuka not come back for his senior year, which was a bit of a surprise at the time. It was kind of early on before all of the guys had started to announce their return. If he not come back, I think Brandon Inniss would be one of those names you would take away as well. He's been a star waiting to emerge, I guess I'd say, in that receiving room, and they are very excited. He's become kind of a leader on the offensive side. Really started that last year, despite not playing as much as he would have liked. So those are guys. I could also throw in tight end Max Clare, who was a 3rd-team All-Big Ten performer at Purdue last year. The question I have with him is just, with all of these other guys, how do you get the ball to Max Clare to kind of turn him into that weapon that he was at Purdue? I asked tight ends coach Keenan Bailey about that in the spring, and he said, well, I think I'd flip it on you and say, because of all those other guys, Max Clare is going to get the most advantageous matchups that he's had in his career. So we'll see. Ohio State has not traditionally used a tight end a ton. There certainly has been no Tyler Warren or anyone like that. Max Clare is definitely the best passing option they've had. And always been I need to see it before I'm going to start talking about it a ton. But I do think Max Clare has a ton of talent, and if they can find a way to get him the ball as much as or in the mix with those other guys, he could be a nightmare for defenses because of what Keenan Bailey said with all those other guys around him.
Patrick, 18 days from right now, you'll be settling in the press box, late third quarter, moving toward the fourth quarter, Ohio State, Texas, number 1 versus number 3. Heck of a way to start this thing off. Right now, as you look toward that matchup and the season generally, what is the primary concern or set of concerns that you think have the ability to derail repeat championship hopes in Columbus? What's on the top of that list?
I think the most obvious one is quarterback. Like if this doesn't get done right, if the guy they choose doesn't go out and can't get the ball to these weapons, if they try and go in with 2 quarterbacks and that derails things. We sort of saw that in 2015 when Ohio State came off a national championship, went with Cardale Jones as the starting quarterback. Then JT Barrett's kind of on his heels, coming in as a red zone guy, and it never really worked. So I think you've got to nail the quarterback position, at least to get a guy out there who can deliver the ball, read the defense. It doesn't have to be a superhero. You don't have to be CJ Stroud. You don't have to be Justin Fields, but you do have to be good enough to not turn the ball over, make right decisions, all that stuff. I think that's the most obvious one. Other than that, I look at the defensive line. I think the edge rushers could be pretty scary group, and they go pretty deep. You've got Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry, 2 seniors who have just sort of waited their time behind Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimalau. But then you've got CJ Hicks, who's a former linebacker. There's been a lot of comparisons. Actually, we were just talking to offensive linemen today, and they were comparing him, not at the level that he is, but in just terms of type of player, to Abdul Carter, obviously someone that you guys will be very familiar with, just in terms of like twitchiness and things like that. If he can live anywhere close to that, that's a great next option to have. Maybe even a guy who can overtake one of those guys who we believe be the starter. They brought in Bo Atkinson from North Carolina this offseason, and Logan George, who was playing at Idaho State. So they've got some good groups there. It's the interior of the defensive line. I think the starters, Caden McDonald and Edric Houston, are both really good, just not a lot of experience for either of them. Behind them, depth is a concern, no doubt about it. Edric Houston went down with a knee injury the first day of fall camp. It was a big scare. Seems to be okay. He's been working his way back into practice, but the fact that he's not fully back in yet is a little bit of alarming because, like I said, there's not much depth there. So I think that could be an area if teams are going to find a way to expose this defense. It might be up that middle if the starting 2 maybe aren't as good as we thought or have some issues, or if there's an injury, things like that. Because I do think that the back 7 has the potential to be really good again, though it may take a little bit of time. So those are probably my 2. If it doesn't work, it's because of either one of those quarterback or the interior of the defensive line.
Before we let you go, I think just from an external perspective, we're just wondering, how do people in Columbus, in this fan base, I know there's a lot of passion, how are they wrestling with wow, Ryan Day won a national championship. They went on this late season surge with holy crap, we've still got this losing streak against Michigan, and Michigan was not very good last year, and we still couldn't beat them. How is that getting worked out in Columbus? Because people are pretty fixated on Ohio State here in Happy Valley because of the 8-game losing streak, and it's viewed as this roadblock to get where they want to go. You know, Michigan's not really viewed as a roadblock to anyone right now based on where their program is in 2025. Yet, I'm just curious how much real estate that matchup is still taking up in the minds of those who follow Ohio State football.
Yeah, so if we're taking the fan perspective, I think there are still a lot of people, the majority of people I would say are, you've got to get this done this year. I was asked on a radio program I did during the offseason, what's more likely to happen? Does Ohio State football beat Michigan, or does Ohio State basketball get back to the NCAA tournament? And I said, I think it's probably football because they're going to be focused on, like, you've won a national championship now. Ryan Day has won the Big Ten, though it has been a minute, and that's certainly something they would like to get back to doing. But he's only beaten Michigan once, and that was 2019, his first year as head coach. Obviously, the 2 teams did not play in 2020. So this is certainly something that, especially as we get closer, I think they will certainly have in the back of their minds, maybe even more so than other years. I think a lot of the guys on the roster saw last season and the disappointment, especially that senior class, and would like to get the job done. From a fan base perspective, I think there is, everybody wants to beat Michigan. There's no doubt about that. But I do think that there is an understanding of, hey, we won a national championship. I put out a poll on Twitter and then also on our message board during the offseason. Would you rather in 2025, not other years, would you rather repeat as a national champion or beat Michigan? And most people said repeat as a national champion. So I do think there was quite a bit of debate on our message board about it, but I think it leans that way just because you saw it last year. Like the ultimate goal has sort of shifted, right? As college football's gone to different formats, even going back to the BCS, like you want to be in the mix to win a national championship, and losing to Michigan isn't necessarily a roadblock to that. Now, is that rivalry still important? Absolutely. And I don't want to diminish it at all. But I think if you are the last team standing, you kind of get the last laugh. Obviously, Michigan fans, I've seen it on social media all offseason. They are sort of holding it over Ohio State fans' heads that, hey, we did beat you guys. You didn't win the national championship the same way we did the year before. But I still think Ohio State fans will take the national championship. But there definitely is going to be, and I think get past this Texas game, probably get past the Penn State game, that's going to really start to come into focus.
8 straight wins in this series for Ohio State through 2019, followed by now 4 straight losses to Michigan. We'll see what comes in 2025. And, of course, Penn State not playing Michigan on an annual basis anymore out of the Big Ten East, but still seemingly stuck to the Ohio State matchup on a year-by-year basis. November 1st, yeah, and we'll get a chance to go up to your neck of the woods, Ohio Stadium. We'll see where both teams stand, but it's a game we've had circled for a long time. And to your point, just because you lose this matchup doesn't mean you can't get a rematch down the road. Penn State was one drive away from perhaps setting up a national championship game rematch against Ohio State last January. Patrick, really appreciate your commentary. I always check in on your coverage at bucknuts.com to check in with Ohio State and how they're progressing towards that November 1st game and towards that kickoff against Texas. So keep up the great work. If you ever want to get us on to talk Penn State with your show, happy to do that. But thanks for coming on ours.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. Love doing this.
All right. Good stuff from Patrick Murphy over at Bucknuts. Before him, you heard from our recruiting insider, Tyler Calvaruso, on the latest Nittany Lions prospect development, some trends there to look at. And we'll come back to you with another episode later this week after we get another look at Penn State football practice. We'll hear from James Franklin. We'll hear from other players and coaches, and we'll bring it all over to you and package it up here on another episode of the podcast later in the week. Between now and then, I encourage you to head over to Lions247.com, take advantage of our 50% off VIP deal right now, and enjoy our practice coverage Tuesday evening into Wednesday and throughout the week as we get another look at these Nittany Lions a couple weeks before kickoff. For now, stepping aside, I am Tyler Donahue. This has been the Lions 24/7 Podcast.